My name is Sharon Kramer, and I'm from Escondido, California. And I would like to report to Congress about the. Congress already knows about the many people across the United States who are claiming and their loss of everything when they reside in a water damaged building that's not taken care of. They can't get any help from the insurer to correct the problem. Their children are sick. The physicians aren't trained. And it's not an accident that this is happening. And the United States Congress and the United States Senate is well aware of this fact. I know this because I moderated a United States Senate staff briefing on behalf of the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pension Committee and the U.S. Public Works Committee in 2006. I know that I've been to Washington several times to report the problem that people are experiencing out here. In 2006, the late Senator Edward Kennedy ordered a federal government accountability office audit into the issue at my request and urging. Originally, the audit request included examining who had the conflicts of interest over this issue that were mass promoting the false concept that it had been scientifically proven these water damaged buildings were not harming people. However, that aspect was deleted from the audit, allowing the false science to be able to use to sell doubt of causation to continue in many courts and in U.S. public health policies. So while the federal GAO audit did help the people who were sick in that it added plausibility to their words that they were ill, the fact that Congress and Senate took direct measures to stop an investigation of who had the conflicts of interest allows the fraud to continue to sell doubt and allows it to be able to be used in insurer claims handling practices and courts across the U.S. to deny liability for causation of illness. So as Congress and the Senate know, this is a multi-billion-dollar issue. It impacts insurers, employers, builders, landlords, tenants, school districts, federal buildings, federal offices, and anyone who happens to work or live in a building is impacted, everyone. So that the one aspect that allowed this fraud to continue to be able to be used to sell doubt of causation is that the GAO audit deleted looking into who had the conflicts of interest. The other aspect that has allowed this fraud to be able to use to sell doubt of causation stems directly from corruption in the California judicial branch. In March of 2005, I was the first to publicly write how this fraud came to be and how it was mass marketed into policy. I have a degree in marketing, so I kind of have superior knowledge of how concepts are promoted to influence decision, and then decision causes action. So I wrote of how these two guys, they're PhDs, one from Big Tobacco and one a retired U.S. surgeon, assistant surgeon general, deputy director of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, National Institute of Occupational National Institute of Occupational Science and Health, CDC NIOSH. These two PhDs applied some math extrapolations to a single rodent study, and they professed that based on these calculations, they were able to prove that all people who were claiming illness from these moldy buildings, particularly the toxins, were just liars out to scam insurers. And then that was in 2002. A medical association that writes policy, particularly workers' comp policy in the United States, the American College of Occupational and Environmental Medicine, legitimized the fraudulent science by making it a position statement to be indicative of portraying it to be the scientific understanding of thousands of U.S. physicians. In 2003, the Manhattan Institute think tank paid Kelman and Hardin, that's the two PhDs, Brian Hardin and Bruce Kelman, owners of Veritox, paid them $40,000 to write a paper for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. That position paper, they wrote, "Thus the notion that toxic mold is an insidious secret killer as so many trial lawyers and media would claim, is junk science, unsupported by actual scientific study. I have it under oath from Mr. Kelman that they were specifically paid to write that statement to be shared with judges. So, a fraud based on just two guys applying math to one rodent study was blown into this mass in U.S. public health policy that it had been proven thousands of sick and dying people were liars out to scam insurers. So I wrote about it in 2005, and they sued me for libel for the writing, claiming my use of the phrase altered his under oath statements was a maliciously false accusation of perjury. I was writing about how Kelman, they're both prolific expert defense witnesses in toxic torts. I was writing about how Dr. Kelman was altering back and forth once he was forced to discuss how the Medical Association paper was so closely connected to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce business marketing paper to sell to the courts that all these people were liars, and how this was all used to establish policy. It was just a simple, it's like nasty children playing telephone. One tells a lie, the next one adds to it, the next one adds to it, the next one adds to it, and before you know it, that's what you think is the truth. So they sued me for libel for the phrase altered as under oath statements. The courts framed me for libel to make it look like I had accused Mr. Kelman of lying about being paid for the ACOM mold statement, that's the Medical Association mold statement, when my writing accurately states he was paid for the U.S. Chambers. They suppressed the evidence that Dr. Kelman committed criminal perjury to establish false theme for malice. The intent of this was to make, by making me appear to be a malicious liar for the words altered his under oath statements in the first public writing of how the fraud came to be, they discredited my whole writing and threw it into question, allowing the fraud to continue. So I went on, that was my first actual writing on the subject even, but I did go on to cause a federal GAO audit. I'm published in a couple medical journals about the conflicts of interest of how they marketed it. I have helped to give the people who are sick a fighting chance and give their doctors that do treat these people credibility. It's sort of like how the climate change scientists have been attacked relentlessly by industry. So have the doctors who are treating people who are ill from microbial contaminants and other environmental illnesses. So that was in the first case. They framed me for libel with actual malice, which aided the fraud to be able to continue to sell doubt. So I started blogging about what they were doing to me and how it was aiding the fraud to be able to continue. And so they filed a second lawsuit against me, and they tried to gag me from writing the words for which I was sued, altered as under oath statements, knowing that if I couldn't write the words for which I was sued and framed, I also couldn't write of how the courts did it, why the courts did it, and the continued adverse impact on the public. So in September of 2011, I sent letters to the Chief Justice of California, the chair of the Executive Committee of the Judicial Council, Justice Douglas Miller, Senator Noreen Evans, who sits on the Judicial Council, Assemblyman Mike Fuhrer, who sits on the Judicial Council, Justice Richard Huffman, who was the ex-chair of the Executive Committee of the Judicial Council and also one of the justices who framed me for libel, Justice Judith McConnell, who was the chair of the California Commission on Judicial Performance, that's supposed to see all the ethics of judges in the California judicial system, and is the main justice who first framed me for libel, aiding this fraud to continue. I sent it to Michael Roddy, Executive Director of the San Diego Superior Court, providing evidence for him how his deputy clerks had falsified court documents. Besides framing me for libel, they've falsified numerous court documents along the way, including the judgment document and the remitter. And to Stephen Kelly, the who is also a Judicial Council member and the clerk of the San Diego 4th District Division I Appellate Court. Mr. Kelly falsified the remitter. That's what happens when an appellate court is sending jurisdiction back to the lower court to finalize the case. They issue a remitter. Mr. Kelly falsified the remitter. He went back in and falsified it's called the California Court Case Management System. That's their computer, their electronic record, to make it match with the falsified remitter. For 7 years, Brian Hardin, the retired deputy director of the CDC NIOSH, has been an undisclosed party to this litigation. He's the 6th owner of the Corporation of Veritox Inc. The appellate court twice suppressed the evidence that his name was missing. So they keep, trying to shut me up, and I just keep blogging about it. So they tried to hold me in contempt of court for putting the evidence on the internet that all these people know how these corrupt courts of California are aiding this fraud to continue and how many lives are damaged. So they said, we want you to post a retraction on the internet that this didn't happen. And so the blog owners sent affidavits saying, no, we're not taking this information off the internet. You can't make us. And so they said to me instead, okay, we want you to sign this I'm paraphrasing. They said, we want you to sign this false confession that you are guilty of libel with actual malice. And it also included the sentence, I do not believe Dr. Kelman committed perjury. This was in March of this year. And I said, no, I'm not going to sign that. So the judge sent me to jail for 2 days for civil contempt of court because I wouldn't sign a false confession of being guilty of libel, which would aid them to collude to defraud the public of billions of dollars in it's nothing short but of hate crimes against the environmentally disabled and dying. And it's billions of dollars. So the judge sent me to jail for 2 days. And since I was unlawfully incarcerated, I was also unlawfully strip searched when I got there. They made me clean the bathrooms of approximately 80 tweakers, prostitutes, and heroin addicts. And I myself, the reason I came into this issue originally is because I had an environmental exposure, which I'm really healthy all the time, but I am sensitive when I get exposed to things now. I became sick from the experience of being incarcerated by the courts. So I sent a message to the judge, I need medical attention, and I sent it to Judge Nugent, Thomas Nugent, Michael Roddy, and Judge Trent Acosta. I'm sick from what you've done to me by unlawfully incarcerating me, and I need medical attention. Nothing. I got nothing back. So I blogged about it, and what they did then, the attorneys submitted another contempt of court complaint that I should be held in contempt of court again for blogging about how they incarcerated me and putting the evidence on the internet. And by this point, I just said, you know what, Your Honor, I'm not even showing up in your court anymore. You are corrupt. You don't have jurisdiction. You are causing me bodily harm. You're causing me emotional distress. You're colluding to defraud the public. I actually submitted a brief to him that was titled, I'm not appearing in your court because you are a criminal and a liar. And he doesn't have jurisdiction. I don't know if people understand about courts can lose jurisdiction for bad behavior, but he also doesn't have jurisdiction because the foundational document to the case is fraudulent. Anyway, so he went ahead and held a trial in June, and I didn't come because he didn't have jurisdiction. And so they've issued this judgment that I can't blog about what they're doing anymore. They ordered I publish a false confession on the internet for a sentence I never even wrote. It's not even in my allegedly libelous writing. They fined me another $3,000. This is on top of the $27,000 that I'm never going to pay. And so we are before the appellate court again. I go right back to Justice Judith McConnell, presiding justice of the 4th District Division I Appellate Court, and the first justice who framed me for libel. knowing she was aiding fraud to continue on behalf of industry. So we'll see where we go from here, but I'm just keeping blogging, and they just keep finding me, and they keep, you know, I don't think they'll ever send me to jail again, though, because the first time they sent me to jail, I was supposed to be for 15 days, but I blogged about it right before I went in, and I got 1,000 hits that day, and they let me out within 2 days. So I'm not fearful of jail time anymore, but I am, however, I am fearful for my physical safety and maybe even my life, because the fraud that I can provide direct evidence of, aided by the leaders of the California judicial branch, with it being politicians all the way from San Diego to DC, either turning a blind eye or benefiting from the fraud. You know, it's the type of thing that whistleblowers do turn up dead for. So that's one of the reasons I wanted to get this on film today. It's kind of an insurance policy, and it's one of the reasons why I keep blogging and keeping things in public light. So that's my story.
Sticking to it.
That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. And I can provide you the direct evidence, too.